You know, I've often wondered what the exact definition of audacity is. I mean, we all throw the word around, but to truly live it, to witness it in its most pure, unadulterated, jaw-dropping form, that's a rare privilege, or perhaps a curse, depending on your perspective. My encounter with Brenda Periwinkle, the self-appointed empress of the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association, definitely taught me a few things about audacity. And let me tell you, it's a lesson that still makes me chuckle and shake my head. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because the story of how Brenda tried to extend her tyrannical HOA reached beyond its borders, only to find herself on the wrong side of a pair of handcuffs courtesy of my own son, is one for the ages. It all started with a dream, a simple, humble dream, to own a home where the color of my mailbox wasn't a matter of public debate, and where the length of my grass didn't threaten to summon a tribunal. After 5 long years in prestigious Pines, a place whose name, in hindsight, was a masterclass in irony, I was finally escaping. Brenda Periwinkle, or President Periwinkle as she insisted on being called, even by people who'd known her since she wore braces and a unibrow, was the primary reason for my exodus. She ran prestigious Pines like her own personal fiefdom, wielding the CCRs like a scepter and the monthly newsletter like a scroll of royal decrees. She had this way of looking down her slightly too long nose at you, her lips pursed into a perpetual mow of disapproval, often framed by whatever garish, oversized designer sunglasses were currently in vogue. Usually fakes, I suspected, judging by the way the gold plating wore off the temples. Her vehicle of choice, a pearlescent white Escalade with more chrome than a 50s diner, was her chariot, often seen cruising the cul-de-sacs at a funereal pace, its driver scanning for violations with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. My infractions had been minor, laughably so. A garden gnome deemed aesthetically discordant, a basketball hoop left out 20 minutes past the arbitrarily decreed storage hour, and, the final straw, a polite request to repaint my front door a shade of blue that was, apparently, too vibrant and not in keeping with the community's sophisticated palette. The palette, by the way, consisted of beige, taupe, greige, and, for the truly adventurous, a slightly darker beige. The day I signed the papers for my new place, a charming little bungalow nestled on 3 acres of blissful, unregulated land just a shade over 2 miles outside prestigious Pines, was one of the happiest of my life. It had a babbling brook, mature oak trees, and, most importantly, no Brenda Periwinkle, or so I thought. The property line of my new haven was clearly marked. I'd had a fresh survey done as part of the purchase, not because I anticipated trouble, but because I'm a details person. My career as a logistics coordinator had drilled into me the importance of precise boundaries and clear delineations. Little did I know this penchant for precision would become my shield. Moving day dawned bright and clear, filled with the happy chaos of boxes, tape, and the cheerful grunts of the movers. We were making good progress, the truck mostly empty by early afternoon when I saw it. The glint of pearlescent white and excessive chrome inching its way down the public county road that ran past the end of my new driveway. My heart sank. It couldn't be, but oh, it was. Brenda Periwinkle, sunglasses firmly in place, looking utterly out of place against the backdrop of my rustic, slightly overgrown paradise. She didn't stop. Not then. She just observed. Her head swiveled slowly, taking in my partially unloaded belongings. The slightly too long grass I was already cherishing. The vibrant blue welcome mat I defiantly placed by the front door. It was a look that promised future engagement, a silent declaration that her reign was not so easily escaped. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just lost, I told myself, though the odds of Brenda Periwinkle, who knew every nook and cranny of a 10-mile radius if it contained a potential HOA violation, being lost were slim to none. The second sighting was less ambiguous. 2 days later, I was in my front yard, wrestling with a particularly stubborn rosebush I intended to transplant, when the Escalade crawled by again. This time, it slowed to an almost complete stop directly opposite my driveway. The tinted window slid down with a silent electric hum, revealing Brenda, her face a mask of thinly veiled contempt, just admiring the local color, she called out, her voice dripping with a saccharine disdain that could curdle milk. It's quite different from prestigious pines, isn't it? I'm not one for confrontation, not usually. My preferred method of dealing with bullies is meticulous preparation, followed by overwhelming factual assault, but her sheer audacity was starting to fray my nerves. Yes, Brenda, I called back, keeping my tone neutral. That was rather the point. A small, humorless smile played on her lips. Indeed, she murmured, and the window slid back up. She didn't drive off immediately. She sat there for a good 30 seconds, engine idling, just radiating disapproval across the county road. It was an act of intimidation, pure and simple, a territorial marking display from an animal who hadn't yet realized she was far from her designated territory. I remember thinking, this woman clearly has too much time on her hands, or perhaps not enough actual power in her real life, so she has to manufacture these little dramas. That evening, I made a point of walking the entire perimeter of my property again, surveyor's map in hand, refamiliarizing myself with every stake and marker. I even took photographs, date-stamped, of the boundary lines and the distance to the public road. A little voice, honed by years of logistics planning and risk assessment, told me this was only the beginning. My son Michael called later that night. He's a good kid, grown into an even better man and a deputy sheriff with the county. He'd been excited about my move, knowing how much the prestigious Pines HOA, and Brenda in particular, had grated on me. So, Mom, how's freedom feel? He asked, his voice warm with affection. I laughed. Mostly good, Mike. A little less prestigious, a lot more peaceful. Though our old friend Brenda seems to be having a hard time letting go, I recounted her drive-bys. Michael sighed. Sounds like Brenda. She's legendary down at the station for her enthusiastic reporting of perceived infractions, mostly parking complaints and suspicious lawn ornaments within prestigious Pines. Don't let her get to you, Mom. She has zero authority where you are now. Zero authority. Those words should have been comforting, and intellectually, I knew they were true. But Brenda Periwinkle operated on a different kind of logic, one where her perceived authority was boundless. The very next morning, as I was enjoying a cup of coffee on my new porch, basking in the absence of HOA regulation, a brightly colored flyer was tucked under my gloriously unregulated mailbox. It wasn't addressed to me, not specifically. It was a generic, professionally printed advertisement for a lawn care service, the kind you usually toss straight into recycling. But tucked just inside its fold, almost like a secret note, was a crisp, laser-printed addendum on prestigious Pines letterhead. It read, "Friendly reminder. While the aesthetic standards of prestigious Pines do not officially extend to adjacent properties, a considerate neighbor understands the importance of maintaining a visual harmony that benefits the entire wider community. Overgrown vegetation, unkempt appearances, or garish displays can negatively impact the property values and tranquil enjoyment of all nearby residents. Thank you for your cooperation. The prestigious Pines Architectural Review Committee." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The passive-aggressive tone, the pompous language, the sheer unmitigated gall of it, it screamed Brenda Periwinkle. She had trespassed onto my property to deliver this friendly reminder. The gloves, it seemed, were off. Or rather, Brenda's meticulously manicured, probably kid leather gloves were being used to deliver increasingly unsubtle threats from across a county line she seemed determined to ignore. I carefully placed the flyer and its insidious little addendum into a Ziploc bag. Evidence item number 1. The game, as they say, was afoot. Brenda's campaign of petty harassment escalated with infuriating predictability. Her pearlescent Escalade became a regular, almost daily fixture, patrolling the county road like a bloated, chrome-laden shark circling a potential meal. Sometimes she'd park just outside my property line, angled in such a way that she had a clear view of my front yard, and just sit there, sometimes for up to an hour. I'd see the silhouette of her head, occasionally tilting as if she were dictating notes into a small recorder. I began to feel like I was under surveillance, which, of course, I was. One afternoon, I was planting a small vegetable garden, something absolutely forbidden in the front yards of prestigious pines, where only approved ornamental shrubbery was tolerated. As I dug into the rich, dark earth, a feeling of pure joy coursing through me, I heard a polite cough. Standing on the public roadside of my new, very rustic split-rail fence, another glorious anti-HOA statement, was Brenda. Today, she'd forgone the sunglasses, perhaps to ensure I got the full impact of her disapproving scowl. She was clutching a small, leather-bound notepad and a dainty, gold-plated pen. "Disturbing the native soil composition, are we?" she inquired, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet country air. "I'm planting tomatoes, Brenda," I replied, trying to keep the exasperation from my voice. "Good for salads." She made a little t sound. Such endeavors, while perhaps charming in a rustic setting, can attract vermin. And vermin, as you know, do not respect property lines. The residents of prestigious pines have a right to live free from pestilence. I straightened up, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of a muddy glove. "Brenda," I said, my voice deliberately calm and level, "this is my property. It is not within the jurisdiction of prestigious pines. What I plant here, and whether or not it attracts the occasional squirrel, is, with all due respect, none of your concern." Her eyes narrowed. "Everything is everyone's concern when it impacts community standards, Mrs. Gable. Some boundaries are moral, not just geographical." I almost laughed at that. Moral boundaries? From Brenda Periwinkle, the woman who once tried to fine a family because their child's chalk drawings on their own driveway were too primitive and lacked artistic merit? I decided documentation was my best friend. I'd invested in a couple of discreet security cameras after the flyer incident, the kind that blend into the landscape. One covered my driveway and the front of the house. Another had a good view of the road and the property line where Brenda so often loitered. Every time her escalate appeared, every time she paused or, heaven forbid, stepped out to observe, the cameras were rolling. I also started a detailed log. Dates, times, duration of her visits, any comments she made if she was close enough to be overheard. My logistics background was kicking in. I was building a case, though for what, I wasn't yet sure. I just knew that people like Brenda don't de-escalate. They feed on any reaction, and in the absence of one, they tend to push harder, seeking that moment of control. Her next move was to try and turn the few distant neighbors I had against me. One morning, Mr. Henderson, a kindly old gentleman whose farm bordered the back of my 3 acres, stopped by. He looked uncomfortable. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, twisting his feed cap in his hands. "Had a rather energetic visitor yesterday. I knew who it was before he even said her name." "Brenda Periwinkle?" He nodded. "That's the one, lady in the big white SUV. Said she was from the, Greater Community Standards Board or some such nonsense. Started asking me if I'd noticed any unusual activities or declining property upkeep from your place. I felt a surge of anger, cold and sharp. And, what did you tell her, Jim?" He gave a wry smile. "Told her the only unusual activity I'd seen was a fancy city lady, wasting good daylight bothering folks who mind their own business. And I told her your property looks a damn sight better than it has in years, now that someone's actually living in it and caring for it." I thanked him, genuinely touched. At least some people still possessed common sense and decency. Brenda, however, was undeterred by Mr. Henderson's lack of cooperation. A few days later, a formal-looking envelope arrived, not hand-delivered this time, but properly mailed, complete with a prestigious Pines return address. Inside, printed on the same ostentatious letterhead as her architectural committee's friendly reminder, was a letter. It was addressed to the occupant of my address. It listed a series of observed potential nuisances, complete with dates and times that, I noted with grim satisfaction, corresponded perfectly with her drive-bys. The nuisances were comical in their absurdity. Excessive unmown grassland, potentially harboring ticks and other vectors. My lovely natural meadow area. Non-standard mailbox coloration. It was a tasteful forest green I'd chosen myself. Visible storage of gardening implements during daylight hours. My wheelbarrow, next to the vegetable patch I was actively working on, and my personal favorite, unregulated bird feeding activities, likely to attract undesirable avian species such as starlings and grackles. The letter concluded by strongly urging me to remediate these issues, promptly to ensure a harmonious coexistence with the nearby prestigious Pines community, and hinted that further escalation may be necessary if voluntary compliance is not achieved. It was signed, in an imperious scrawl, Brenda Periwinkle, President, Prestigious Pines, HOA, and concerned citizen. I photocopied the letter, filed the original with my growing collection of Brendabilia, and then I called Michael again. "She's sending official-looking letters now, Mike," I told him, accusing me of harboring ticks and attracting grackles. On my own property, miles from her HOA. Michael let out a long whistle. "Wow, Mom, she's really doubling down. Okay, this is bordering on harassment." The letters themselves, especially if they're making vague threats, could be problematic for her. Keep documenting everything. Every letter, every sighting. If she sets foot on your property again, or tries to block your access to the road or anything like that, call the non-emergency line and report it. But for now, her sending you snail mail, however annoying, isn't strictly illegal unless the content becomes overtly threatening or defamatory. It's the pattern of behavior we need to watch. He was right. Her letters were carefully worded, always staying just on the safe side of outright illegality, filled with insinuations rather than direct accusations of wrongdoing that could be easily disproven. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, a psychological game designed to wear me down. But Brenda Periwinkle had fundamentally misunderstood one thing about me. I don't wear down easily. I get methodical. I gather data, and then I act. And I had a feeling that Brenda, in her boundless arrogance, was about to give me the perfect opportunity. The next phase of Brenda's interference involved attempts to co-opt actual municipal services. It started subtly. One morning, a county code enforcement vehicle pulled up. A pleasant, if slightly harried-looking, young woman named Ms. Albright introduced herself. "We received an anonymous complaint about, she consulted her clipboard, frowning slightly. "Potential uncontained refuse and overgrown vegetation creating a fire hazard." I invited her to walk the property with me. I showed her my neatly stacked recycling bins, my securely lidded trash can, which wasn't even full, as pickup wasn't for 2 more days, and my overgrown vegetation, which consisted of the natural meadow area far from any structures, and the managed grass around the house itself. "This is a 3-acre property, Miss Albright," I explained. "A good portion of it is intentionally kept natural to support local wildlife. It's not a fire hazard, it's an ecosystem. And my grass is mowed regularly, just not to putting green standards." Miss Albright, to her credit, looked slightly embarrassed. "Ma'am, your property looks fine to me." More than fine, actually. Some people have a different idea of what constitutes a hazard. She made some notes, thanked me for my time, and left. I had a pretty good idea who that some people was. 2 days later, it was animal control. Another anonymous tip, this time about a possible feral dog colony and irresponsible pet ownership leading to roaming animals. I owned one elderly, impeccably behaved golden retriever, Bartholomew, who spent most of his days napping on the porch and was never, ever allowed to roam. The animal control officer, a grizzled man named Dave, who looked like he'd seen it all, took one look at Bartholomew wagging his tail placidly, glanced around my securely fenced, in the areas that mattered for a dog, backyard, and just sighed. "Lady with a big white SUV been calling, hasn't she?" he asked without preamble. I nodded. "Figures," he grunted. "She calls us about once a month for something in prestigious Pines. Squirrels digging in flower beds. Someone feeding stray cats. Never anything to it. Sorry to bother you, ma'am." Each of these visits, while ultimately fruitless for Brenda, was an interruption, a source of anxiety, and a clear escalation. She was now attempting to use taxpayer-funded services to harass me. I dutifully logged each incident, making sure to get the names of the officers and the complaint numbers, if available. My evidence folder was becoming impressively thick. My son Michael was growing increasingly frustrated on my behalf. "She's abusing the system, Mom," he said during one of our calls. "These anonymous complaints tie up resources. If we could prove she's the one making them all, and that they're knowingly false, that's a different story. But anonymous is hard to pin down without her admitting it or a clear pattern linked directly to her. The clear pattern was certainly there for me, but proving it officially was another matter. Brenda was clever enough, or perhaps just paranoid enough, to likely be using burner phones or public payphones, if such things even still existed, or perhaps even enlisting one of her HOA cronies to make the calls. I knew I needed something more concrete, something undeniable. The peak of her audacity, the event that finally brought things to a head, occurred on a blustery Tuesday afternoon. I'd hired a local arborist to trim some dead branches from one of the large oak trees near the front of my property. It was responsible maintenance, ensuring safety and the health of the tree. The arborist's truck, clearly marked with his company logo, was parked entirely on my driveway, well off the county road. They'd put out safety cones, even though they weren't strictly necessary given their location. I was inside making them a pitcher of lemonade when I heard raised voices. I hurried to the window. There was Brenda Periwinkle, out of her Escalade, which was parked haphazardly on the shoulder of the county road, effectively blocking one lane. She was gesturing wildly at the arborist, a burly, normally placid man named Gus, who looked about ready to climb his tree-trimming ladder just to get away from her. I walked out, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Is there a problem, Brenda?" She whirled on me, her face flushed. "Problem? This is an outrage. This circus is creating a hazard. Your workmen are blocking the road. Their equipment is unsightly. And the noise, it's completely disrupting the tranquility of the wider community." I looked pointedly at Gus's truck, parked squarely on my property. I looked at the quiet county road where only her Escalade was causing an obstruction. "Brenda," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "his truck is on my land. Your car is blocking a public thoroughfare. The only unsightly equipment I see is your vehicle parked illegally. And as for noise, the loudest thing out here right now is you." Gus, bless his heart, chimed in. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job, safely and on private property." This lady pulled up and started yelling about permits we don't need and decibel levels. Brenda drew herself up to her full, though not terribly impressive height. "I am a concerned citizen and president of the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association. I have a right to ensure public safety and adherence to community standards." That's when she did it. That's when she crossed the line from irritating nuisance to something else entirely. She pulled out her phone. "I am calling the sheriff's department," she announced, her voice shrill with indignation. "There are unauthorized commercial operations occurring here, creating a public nuisance and potentially damaging public property with their heavy vehicles." She was actually dialing. My mind raced. This was it. She was making a false report right in front of me and a credible witness. This was beyond petty complaints. This was official. I took a deep breath. "Brenda," I said very clearly, "you are aware that my son, Michael Gable, is a deputy with the county sheriff's department, right?" Her eyes flickered for a nanosecond. "That is irrelevant. The law applies to everyone." And she put the phone to her ear, her voice becoming syrupy sweet and distressed as she presumably spoke to the dispatcher. "Yes, I need to report a disturbance. A commercial vehicle blocking the roadway. Possible unpermitted work." She was painting a picture of chaos and illegality that was pure fiction. Gus and I exchanged a look. He just shook his head, a mixture of disbelief and resignation on his face. I felt a strange calm descend. Brenda had finally overplayed her hand. She thought she was summoning the cavalry to validate her authority. She had no idea she was actually summoning her own reckoning. The wait for the deputies felt both like an eternity and mere minutes. Gus, the arborist, had quietly instructed his crew to pause their work. He stood with me near my porch, occasionally shaking his head and muttering about some people having too much darn time. Brenda, meanwhile, paced back and forth on the public road shoulder beside her illegally parked Escalade, her arms crossed, a smug, expectant look on her face. She was clearly rehearsing her speech, anticipating the moment the uniformed officers would arrive and validate her complaints, putting me and my disruptive tree trimming firmly in our place. I used the waiting time productively. I pulled out my own phone and discreetly started a video recording, capturing Brenda's continued presence, her vehicle's position, and the general scene. I also sent a quick text to Michael. Brenda P. is at my place. Just called the sheriff on me for having a tree trimmed on my own property. Expecting deputies soon. Thought you should know. No need to intervene unless it gets really crazy. But she's alleging road blockage and unpermitted work. His reply was almost instantaneous. Unbelievable. Keep your cool, Mom. Let them handle it initially. If they have questions, they know how to reach me. Document everything. Knowing Michael was aware and knowing his professionalism gave me an extra layer of composure. The first patrol car arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 deputies, both young, professional, and looking a little puzzled as they surveyed the entirely unchaotic scene. Brenda practically bounced towards them, her hand raised like a schoolgirl desperate to answer a question. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, her voice pitched with a perfect blend of urgency and civic-minded distress. "This situation has gotten completely out of hand." She launched into her tirade, gesturing dramatically towards Gus's truck, still on my property, my house, and the trees. She spoke of blatant disregard for public safety, unauthorized commercial activity in a residential adjacent zone, and potential damage to the road infrastructure from these heavy vehicles. She conveniently forgot to mention her own Escalade was the only thing actually obstructing traffic. The deputies listened patiently, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a Deputy Miller, had a notepad out. The other, Deputy Chen, walked over to Gus's truck, peered at its placement, checked the cones, and then strolled back. He looked at Brenda's Escalade, then at Brenda. I watched them, saying nothing, letting Brenda dig her own hole deeper and deeper. When she finally paused for breath, Deputy Miller turned to me. "Ma'am, are you the property owner here?" "Yes, officer, I am," I replied calmly. "Eleanor Gable, and this tree service? They're here at your request?" "Yes, they are. Performing routine maintenance on that large oak. All their equipment and vehicles are entirely on my private property." Deputy Miller nodded slowly. He then looked at Brenda. "Ma'am, you identified yourself as?" "Brenda Periwinkle," she announced proudly, as if the name itself should command respect. "President of the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association. Just up the road," Deputy Chen spoke up, his voice mild. "Miss Periwinkle, your vehicle is currently parked in a way that's impeding the flow of traffic on this county road. Could you please move it to a safer location?" Brenda looked aghast. "My vehicle? But I'm the complainant. I needed to be here to meet you." "We appreciate that, ma'am," Deputy Miller said, "but we still need the road clear. You can pull it fully onto the shoulder, or into that driveway if Mrs. Gable permits." I certainly did not permit. "There's ample room on the shoulder further down," I offered mildly. Brenda huffed, clearly annoyed at this shift in focus away from my supposed transgressions. As she stomped off to grudgingly move her chariot, Deputy Miller turned back to me. "So, Mrs. Gable, aside from Miss Periwinkle's concerns, has there been any actual issue here? Any disagreements with the arborist? Any safety problems?" "None whatsoever, officer," I said. "Mr. Gus and his team have been perfectly professional. The only disturbance has been Miss Periwinkle's repeated interruptions, and now this." Just then, a second county sheriff's vehicle pulled up. This one was an unmarked SUV, but it had the official plates. And behind the wheel was my son Michael in his uniform. He hadn't come lights and siren, just driven up normally. He got out, his expression neutral but observant. Brenda, who had just finished repositioning her Escalade, still not entirely well, I might add, spotted him. Her eyes widened, first in surprise, then in a sort of triumphant recognition. "Oh, Officer Gable," she gushed, suddenly all smiles and deference. "Michael, so good to see you. Perhaps you can explain to your colleagues here the importance of upholding community standards." She clearly thought Michael's arrival was her ace in the hole, assuming he'd somehow back her up out of some misplaced loyalty, or perhaps believing her own rhetoric about community standards transcended mere jurisdictional boundaries or even familial ties when it came to her perceived righteousness. Michael gave her a polite, professional nod. "Ms. Periwinkle." He then addressed the other deputies. "Miller Chen, what seems to be the situation?" Deputy Miller quickly briefed him. "Complaint of road obstruction, unpermitted commercial work, general nuisance." He mentioned that the tree crew was entirely on private property, and the only road obstruction had been Miss Periwinkle's own vehicle. Brenda was practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for Michael to admonish me or the arborists. Michael listened, then looked from Brenda to me, then at Gus. His gaze was steady, analytical. This was Deputy Gable, on duty, not Michael, my son. "Miss Periwinkle," Michael said, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of his office. "Did you state to the dispatcher that there were vehicles blocking this public roadway and unpermitted commercial work taking place?" Brenda puffed up. "Yes, I did, because there are. This is a menace." Michael looked at Gus's truck, "Still very much on my property." He looked at the open county road, now clear except for their official vehicles. "So, to be clear," Michael continued, his tone even, "you reported an active obstruction of a public road by this arborist's truck?" Brenda, perhaps sensing a shift she didn't quite understand but already disliking its direction, hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Well, it was a potential obstruction. And the overall activity, Miss Periwinkle." Michael cut her off, politely but with an undeniable edge of authority. "The specific allegation you made to dispatch, which prompted these officers to respond, was that commercial vehicles were blocking the road. Is that correct?" Her eyes darted between the officers. She seemed to be realizing this wasn't going the way she'd envisioned. "Yes, that was part of it," she conceded, a little less confidently. Deputy Chen then spoke, holding up his own notepad. "Miss Periwinkle, when we arrived, your vehicle was the one impeding traffic. The arborist truck is and appears to have been well within Mrs. Gable's property lines. We've also spoken with the arborist, and tree trimming of this nature on private property doesn't require a county permit unless it's impacting public right-of-way, which this is not." Brenda's face began to turn a mottled shade of red. "But the noise, the disruption, Prestigious Pines is right over there." She waved a hand vaguely in the direction of her kingdom, which was, I reiterate, over 2 miles away and screened by a substantial tree line. Michael's expression didn't change. "Miss Periwinkle, you are aware that filing a false report with a law enforcement agency is a serious offense, aren't you?" The color drained from Brenda's face as quickly as it had risen. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked like a fish that had just been landed on the dock. I was concerned," she stammered. "I am a pillar of this community." "Being concerned doesn't give you license to misrepresent facts to law enforcement, tying up valuable resources that could be needed for actual emergencies," Michael stated, his voice still level but now carrying an undeniable steel. He gestured towards Gus. "This gentleman and his crew lost work time. These deputies spent their time responding to a call that appears to be, at best, a gross exaggeration, and at worst, deliberately false." Deputy Miller, who had been listening intently, now stepped forward. "Ms. Periwinkle, based on our observations and witness statements, it appears you knowingly reported false information to dispatch concerning a road obstruction and unpermitted work. Your own vehicle was the only one improperly parked. This has wasted departmental resources." Brenda looked from Michael to Miller to Chen, her eyes wide with dawning horror. She had expected vindication, perhaps even a citation issued to me. She had not, in her wildest periwinkle-fueled fantasies, expected this. This is outrageous," she sputtered. "I am the president of..." Ma'am, Deputy Miller interrupted, his patience clearly gone. Your title is irrelevant to the fact that you appear to have made a false police report. Michael, what's your take? Michael met his colleague's gaze. The initial call seems to have contained material falsehoods presented as fact, which directly led to this response. We also have Mrs. Gable's previous reports of ongoing harassment and what appears to be a pattern of Ms. Periwinkle overstepping her bounds and misusing public complaint systems. Today's actions, however, are direct and actionable. He turned fully to Brenda, and now, for the first time, I saw not just Deputy Gable, but my son, whose peace I had sought and whom this woman had now directly involved through her own malice. Brenda Periwinkle, Michael said, his voice ringing with an authority that was both official and deeply personal. You are being informed that your call today contained demonstrably false information. Given your repeated interactions and warnings concerning misuse of complaint lines relating to Prestigious Pines, and now this clear instance of filing a false report regarding a property well outside your HOA's jurisdiction, leading to an unnecessary emergency services response. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Brenda was pale, her usually pursed lips now slack with shock. Deputy Miller then uttered the words Brenda Periwinkle probably never, ever expected to hear directed at her. Periwinkle, I am placing you under arrest for making a false report to law enforcement. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Brenda stared, her jaw literally dropping. Gus, the arborist, let out a low whistle. I simply watched, a complex mix of vindication and disbelief washing over me. Deputy Miller calmly took out a pair of handcuffs. Brenda finally found her voice, a shrill, panicked squawk. Arrest me? You can't arrest me. Do you know who I am? I'll have your badges. I'll sue this whole county. This is an assault on civic duty. Deputy Miller, unfazed, continued. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, as he expertly cuffed her hands behind her back. Her designer knockoff handbag slipped from her grasp and landed with a soft thud on the roadside gravel. Michael stepped back, allowing Deputies Miller and Chen to handle the arrest procedure, but his eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and in them, I saw a grim satisfaction and a hint of apology that I'd had to endure this for so long. The sight of Brenda Periwinkle, Empress of Prestigious Pines, being read her Miranda rights and then gently but firmly guided into the back of Deputy Miller's patrol car, her face a mask of utter incredulity and sputtering rage, was, well, it was something I don't think I'll ever forget. As the patrol car pulled away, taking Brenda towards a reckoning she had so thoroughly earned, Gus turned to me, a wide grin spreading across his face. Well, ma'am, he said, I reckon that's one way to deal with a problem neighbor, or a non-neighbor, as the case may be. He chuckled. Can we get back to trimming that tree now? The day's not getting any younger. I smiled, a genuine relaxed smile for what felt like the first time in weeks. Yes, Gus, I said. Let's. Michael stayed for a few minutes after the others had left with their very surprised passenger. He walked over, a slightly weary but satisfied look on his face. Well, Mom, he said, that was something. I nodded. You could say that. Thank you, Michael. Not for, but for doing your job so professionally. He gave a small shrug. She crossed a clear line today, Mom. Made a false report. That's not something we can ignore, regardless of who the complainant or the subject is. Her history of nuisance calls within Prestigious Pines is well documented, but this, here, was a direct abuse of emergency services related to you, outside her jurisdiction. Miller and Chen had all they needed once she admitted to making those specific false claims about the road blockage. He sighed. Honestly, I think she was so used to throwing her weight around in the HOA, so used to people caving to her, that she genuinely believed her authority extended everywhere, and that the mere mention of Prestigious Pines would make everyone jump. I thought about all the documentation I'd collected. The photos, the logs, the passive-aggressive letters. Will any of my evidence be useful? I asked. Michael smiled. It might be very useful for the DA, Mom, especially in establishing a pattern of harassment if they decide to pursue that angle in addition to the false report. The arresting officers will file their report, and this incident will be part of her record. For today, the false report was the concrete charge they could act on immediately. He looked around at my peaceful 3-acre slice of freedom. Hopefully, this sends a very clear message that her reign of terror does not extend to County Line Road. We talked a little more. Then he had to get back on patrol. As he drove away, I stood on my porch, looking at the quiet scene. The arborists were back at work, the sound of their saws a productive, normal sound. Bartholomew, my golden retriever, ambled over and laid his head on my knee, thumping his tail. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, colors Brenda would have definitely found too vibrant. The news of Brenda Periwinkle's arrest spread through prestigious Pines like wildfire, of course. Mr. Henderson called me the next evening, barely able to contain his chuckles. "Heard tell your old friend Brenda had a little run. In with the law," he said, his voice crinkling with amusement. "Seems her empire don't quite stretch as far as she thought it did." Apparently, the HOA board convened an emergency meeting. Without Brenda's overbearing presence and iron-fisted control, some of the other, more timid board members finally found their voices. There were whispers of a vote of no confidence, discussions about her flagrant abuse of HOA funds for her surveillance activities, all those professionally printed flyers and letters weren't cheap, and the general embarrassment she had brought upon their prestigious community. Brenda was eventually charged with making a false police report, a misdemeanor, but one that came with a hefty fine and mandatory community service. The delicious irony was that her community service involved cleaning up litter along county roads, perhaps giving her a new and less adversarial perspective on public spaces. Her legal troubles and the subsequent fallout within prestigious Pines effectively ended her reign. She resigned from the HOA presidency, citing personal reasons and a desire to focus on other community endeavors, which I privately translated as avoiding a full-scale rebellion and potential lawsuits from her own HOA members. The new HOA president, a quiet accountant named Susan, who had always seemed intimidated by Brenda, immediately began dismantling some of Brenda's more draconian rules. The approved color palette was expanded. Children were actually seen playing gasp in their own front yards. There was even a rumor that someone installed a tastefully discreet pink flamingo without immediate censure. For me, life at my little bungalow became everything I had hoped for: peaceful, private, and blissfully unregulated. I planted more tomatoes, put up a bird feeder that attracted all sorts of undesirable but beautiful avian species, and let my meadow grow wild and lovely. The pearlescent white escalade was never seen on my road again. Sometimes, when I'm out in my garden, I think about Brenda Periwinkle. I don't feel anger anymore, mostly just a kind of bemused pity for someone whose need for control was so consuming it blinded her to reason and boundaries. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the biggest bullies are also the most insecure, and that occasionally, if you stand your ground calmly and let them overplay their hand, they become the architects of their own downfall. My son Michael, ever the professional, rarely brought it up again, but whenever he came over for dinner, there was a certain shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of the suburban warfare we'd navigated and won. And I made sure to always have his favorite pie, made with ingredients grown in my beautifully unregulated garden. So, that's the story of how HOA Karen, or rather President Brenda Periwinkle, tried to exert her power where it didn't belong and ended up facing the consequences in a rather dramatic fashion. All thanks to her own outrageous actions and a son who just happened to be wearing a sheriff's badge. It just goes to show, you can't always choose your neighbors or your former HOA presidents, but you can choose to stand firm on your own land, under your own rules. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a run-in with an HOA that went completely off the rails. I'd love to hear your stories. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of everyday battles and ultimate victories.